Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. Now if you've been watching the channel for the last few weeks, you'll know I've been buried in the middle of doing a demon army for Nurgle for Warhammer 40,000. Part of the army is going to be this, which is the Forge World Great Unclean one. And if you've watched the channel for quite a long time, you'll know that whenever I get a cool model like this with lots of weird, interesting bits on it, I will quite often take castings to use for future projects. I'm just going to show you through a few that I've made over the last couple of years. This one's probably the biggest thing in the channel, the Glockin model that I cast up to use for Titans and possessed 40k machinery. Some castings here from my Warhound Titan and the Reaver Titan, so I can use that on big mechanical pieces. It's very Nurgle based, a few boxes I've just picked out here. That actually was accidental. This one here is actually more of a Horus Heresy set where I picked up some shoulder pads again for the Death Guard. But it was about taking castings of the shoulders so that I could cast up the symbols and use them really over hundreds of models rather than buying lots of sort of shoulder pads each time. And again, there's videos for all these things I'm talking about kind of on the channel. And this last one's here is Space Marine one, and this was where I took some Dark Angel iconography and some Imperial Fist iconography, cast them up and used them for shoulder pads and symbols, both on normal Marines, and also I converted Terminators up to make them look like really cool Dark Angel Terminators. So what I'm saying is I've got probably 15, 16 boxes like this actually with all sorts of different castings in. I've done some orc castings and some other castings, and sometimes I keep them, sometimes I melt them down. Depends what I'm going to potentially use them for in the future. So I thought, right, there's some parts on this model that I really want to cast up. This video is not going to really be about specifically what I'm casting for the next project. This is going to be about the equipment I use to do it. So this is what I've traditionally used for years and years, which is blue stuff from Greenstuffworld. And this is like a thermoplastic that you melt down, make the mould out of, and if you want to reuse it again later, you can melt it. It makes kind of a flexible mould. Now, every time I do a blue stuff video and show castings, people tell me, oh, that's just Oyumaru, if I'm going to say this correctly, which is the Japanese original kind of version of blue stuff. So I thought, right, let's test that out. Let's see if there is Oyumaru or whether there's going to be some differences. The other thing I've had quite a few people comment on my blue stuff videos the last year or so is this, which is white morph or thermoplastic beads. A lot of people have said this is way cheaper. You can't do quite as much with it, but it is really cheap and great for kind of single part molds. Okay, fab, pick some up and try that. And this last one, a little bit disappointing. This is from TT Combat. Now, I love TT Combat. They do some amazing scenery. I've got some pieces like that. And they had on their channel advertised these, which is basically, when I've looked at it and used it, it is the white morph beads we've just looked at. But they call it something different. They call it mini mold, and they obviously repackaged it. Now, on the website, some nice pretty pictures of the packaging it's come in, so very disappointed that it came in this little bag. Now, cost-wise, I ordered the first three things from Amazon. Blue stuff cost me $15.95, which works out £34.60 per 100 grams. The Oyumaru cost me £10.98, which is $14.64 per 100 grams. The white morph cost me $6.49, that's $6.49 100 grams, and the mini mould cost me £6, which works out at £12 per 100 grams. So, cost-wise, blue stuff is the most expensive, but it is something that I've used more than any of the others, and it's kind of my comfort zone. The other thing to bear in mind, I ordered the first three things from Amazon, and interestingly, the Oyumaru was the last one that seller had left, and the only stuff left on Amazon currently, as I record this, I'm sure it'll change in a couple of days, was actually twice the price of what I paid for it, so actually would make it about the same price as the blue stuff. So I'm not really going to go too much into exactly how to make the molds, but you've seen there, I've dropped the bars of the blue stuff into boiling water in a thermos flask to keep it warm. And then it melts and they leave it for a couple of minutes and it just gets to that melting stage, and I'm just going to press it onto the parts of the model I want to mould. Now I'm using way more than I normally would for a mould of that size. I'm just taking that shoulder piece, but really this is just, again, the experiment, just to see how they work in different ways, more so than actually being efficient. The best thing when you're using this moulding material, at the end of it you can trim any excess off that you don't need for the mould, but try and use just, a smaller amount, because even though it is reusable, you want to try and get the maximum amount of moulds out of it. Now if you are interested in doing full videos in terms of how to use blue stuff, how to cast, how to make the moulds, the different materials you might put in the mould afterwards, because there are different materials you can put in. I'm going to use green stuff in this sense, but if you do want those videos, I'll try and remember to link them down below, because I've got lots of videos on the channel about how to cast up kind of model parts. So I'm choosing to cast a little shoulder kind of weird symbol thing there, and I'm casting up the spine part across the back. So after a few minutes, probably about 10 minutes when the blue stuff has dried, very simply peel it off, be a little bit careful around the areas where there's, bit of the spines and stuff stuck into, and it gives you a nice detailed intricate mould like you've just seen there. So repeating exactly the same process with the Oyumaru. Bear in mind I did use fresh water. I was being fair with the system, so I probably boiled my kettle far too many times in this session than I needed to, but yeah, doing the same thing, and I'm casting up exactly the same parts that I've just cast with the blue stuff. Now what I would say, Oyumaru, absolutely, definitely, this is what blue stuff is. Obviously blue stuff is Greenstuffworld's kind of proprietary name for it, I suppose, but it feels exactly the same material. Handling it, how long you put it in the water, it just feels exactly the same. Now, before I peeled the pink stuff off, the Great and Clean, you can see there, I opened up the beads for the first time. Now the instruction on the back of the beads basically says, you chuck these in boiling water, they mould together, you make the mould out of it. It's slightly more complicated than that, but it's the same thing. So I took a big handful of these beads, put them into the boiling water, and followed the same kind of process. This was quite exciting actually, because I've never used these before, and they come solid white, and as they sit in the water they start to go see-through. So it's time to peel off the Oyumaru mould. Obviously the Oyumaru, you get loads of different bars, loads of different colours. I chose to use the pink just because it was completely opposite to the blue bars that were in there, and it looks visually identical to the blue stuff, and how this mould looks, how it handles, how it behaves. So I really do think this is the same product, which is what a lot of people have said for years. Now looking at the white morph beads, see here, they've all kind of clumped together. They've gone see-through and they've been in the water that bit longer. One thing I would say in the difference is this is super, super sticky. Was sticking to the sides of the thermos container I was using, then stuck to the bottom. It was quite difficult to work with compared to how blue stuff is, and how I'm used to that. So definitely a stickier substance, and I did have some of this still sealed to the thermos despite my very best efforts in getting it off. Now obviously this is not a thermos flask I'm ever going to use for food, so you know, I'm not going to poison myself. Now putting it onto the model, again I put it straight on in exactly the same way, and actually what was quite nice about it is the fact that it goes see-through, so you can see if you've left any air pockets kind of on the model, which I really did like, because blue stuff from the Oyumaru kind of goes semi-see-through, but not really as transparent. And as it starts to dry, this is the stage where I actually thought it was dry, started to peel and realised, nope, it's losing its shape. So with this, you can't just start peeling it until it's gone fully white. And again, here's my mistake. I thought at this point it was fully white and fully set. I took it off here. This didn't look too bad, but it had lost a bit of detail inside. And then I peeled off the big back piece, and it made a complete mess of the mould. So it was time to then start it again. Even at this stage though, it was incredibly difficult to peel this off, and this hadn't fully cured yet, so it is a more difficult thing. But because I basically made a right mess of that mould, peeled it off far too early where there was still some transparent areas in it, it was time to basically melt that down and start again. So I didn't cast the shoulder piece again because that had basically got the casting quite right. Just did the back panel just across there in the same method, and this time I left it for a long time, left it for a good couple of hours, a lot longer than you would have to leave a blue stuff mould, and this was really tough to get off this model, and I think this is where the difference lies. Now this sets rock solid, no flexibility at all, and I think I was very lucky not to have broken the parts off this model into the back when it went in. So I think when you're doing more intricate moulds, I would watch it. Now putting the two moulds together here, I think that footage was actually the second one of the TT Combat beads, but I made two moulds, one with the white morph, one with the TT Combat beads, and I'm convinced the TT Combat mini mold beads are just these white morph ones, so don't bother buying it from TT Combat, you can get it for half the price off Amazon. So now it's about filling the moulds. I fill moulds in a number of different ways depending what I'm doing, but in this case I'm just going to use green stuff. Now the reason for that is, one, I had some knocking around, it's quick and easy, but the other side is as well, I really do think if I was to use milliput, which is a more solid thing, there is no way I would get the milliput out of those solid moulds. It just wouldn't happen. So I want to make it a fair comparison, and this is more about how much detail these materials pick up, and then do some little commentary on the pieces. So I'm taking some green stuff that I've thoroughly mixed and pressing it into the moulds, really thin layer, because again these are going to be used on top of existing models, so you don't want too much of a thick layer of green stuff into these, and this is more of a kind of press mould style. And actually, easy to put them in. The flexible green stuff and Oyumaru molds, sorry, blue stuff and Oyumaru molds, kind of more my comfort zone. That's kind of how I'm used to making the molds flexing around. So the molds from the white morph beads that are absolutely rock solid, it did feel a little odd having to really force it and with no flex in the mold, but it seemed to go in absolutely fine. Again, just a different kind of style. And I left them, to one side just to fully set. Now the spine molds, this was quite interesting. I really wasn't sure how this was going to come out with the white mold, we'll call it the white morph, into the blue stuff mold. I'm really used to working with this, and what I'm doing here is pushing the green stuff into the kind of spine where it's sticking in the thin areas. You work on that area first with some little pieces of green stuff to force it into that mold before you work on the wider area. So I suppose I've done this quite a lot, and you just keep forcing it basically until no more will go in. You will still miss stuff occasionally, but with the flexibility of the mold, you can kind of get some confidence, and that slight transparency, you can get some confidence that you've actually got all the green stuff into sort of the mold parts. So I did the same with that. Did exactly the same process with the Oyumaru, which for now basically we're treating as it's all the same thing. It was a little bit more tricky when I came to using the white morph, because this mold is rock solid. There is no flex, there is no give, and you can't see through the mold at the side, so it's a little bit trickier to work out whether you've put the right amount of stuff in. Now this is where I think when it comes to what material you cast with, I was fairly confident green stuff was going to work in here, because then when you're pulling it off the molds, the green stuff will come out of those little spiky bits. Now, this is how it's come out of the mold with the push molds, the little ones there. Really nice little, I don't know what you call it, nearly pustule thing has come out the side there, and it's come out basically exactly the same from the Oyumaru, just further reinforcing the fact that I do think this is the same product, just with different names, or Greenstuffworld have been inspired by the Oyumaru and made their own, but basically the same thing. Now, with the white morph, the mold is absolutely solid, so you can't flex it to pop it out. Managed to cut my fingernails recently, cut them down, probably the wrong time when I'm doing this mold, because it was a little bit tricky to get my fingernails under that green stuff to get this off the mold. And again, give it a good pull and it did come off the mold. And this is my point about why I don't think you could necessarily use milliput on it, because milliput would set rock solid, and when you're trying to pull and drag it out of the mold, I think it would snap. So I'm going to test that, but I am 99.9% sure that is what would happen. So I think if you're doing sort of small push mold pieces like this white morph would be absolutely fine. And actually, it works really nicely. It holds a real nice level of detail. You can't from the end result actually see much difference between the two kind of methods. Now this is where I wouldn't use the white morph and the solid one, because getting the casting out of the blue stuff and the Oyumaru, dead easy, because you can flex the mold, you can bend the mold off as well as pulling the piece off, and it comes out really nicely. And I would be perfectly happy to use milliput into this style of mold, because you peel the mold off the piece rather than peeling the piece off the mold. Now this is where the green stuff comes good in this casting here into this mold. Again, picking it out was very fiddly, but because the green stuff has that layer of flexibility and strength, and it's been allowed to set thoroughly overnight, it was a whole different day I did this second part of the filming, it does peel out of this mold actually quite nicely. There were a couple of moments when I thought, is it about to kind of rip and tear? But it did survive, it did come out the mold, but you can see the level of force I'm having to use to get this out, and you can see how bits of it are catching in the mold. But actually it came out really nicely, and between the two of them, they both gave really nice results. I'm really happy with this kind of level of casting. But again, it would only be for green stuff with this solid cast. And I do think if you were going to be casting up delicate pieces, and you were doing a push mold onto delicate pieces, you would have trouble, and I think you might damage the original model. So really for me, I'm going to keep this white morph just for single piece push molds with no real complicated bits in it. Now that made me ask a question. Can white morph be used for two-part molds? So if you've, again, drop the video down below where I've shown you how to do two-part molds and things like that properly, but I just thought I'm going to knock together a two-part mold, because I don't know whether white morph will set to itself or whether be able to peel it apart. One of the beauties of kind of Oyumaru or blue stuff is that you can make multi-part molds on it, so you can get both sides of the mold. So I wanted to do the same thing and just a little mini test on the white morph to see what would happen. So I've made the two-part mold here. You can see me just pushing the piece in. How I've made it is kind of irrelevant because it's more about the discussion. Let it thoroughly dry, it then did stick to my mat quite severely and has picked up a lot of stuff off there. So yeah, do not do this on any surface that you are worried about potentially damaging. So I've made that one part mould, let it thoroughly dry, probably give it an hour or so it cooled right the way through and went totally white. And then the next part of the mould, making the top part across there. Now, this comes out of the water very, very hot, and I had the thought that, if this goes straight onto this white morph now, it's going to stick, definitely. No way, no way about that, it will stick. So I left it for a while. You can see there a slight colour change in how it went before putting it onto the top of the mould, just to take out some of that stickiness, because when it comes out of very hot water, it is incredibly sticky. After leaving it to cool for 5-10 minutes, it wasn't then too bad. So I made the top of the mould, and I kind of knew this was going to not work when I was at this point. You kind of get the sense of how materials work when you use them for a while. And just out of interest, the part that I did use in here is part of a mole mortar from a 1980s Imperial Guard thing for 40k. So yeah, I knew it would survive at the end of it. So trying to separate this mould, completely, utterly impossible. So if you want to make 2-part moulds, this is not the material to do it with. Do the 2-part moulds with blue stuff, and again, watch the guide down below so you get an idea of how to do it. So I did rescue that part, however, banged it back in the boiling water, and we're all good. So I suppose that's just an exploration through what was supposed to be 4 different types of moulding material. Turns out it's actually only 2 different types of moulding material. So I'm going back to my comfort zone, going back to the blue stuff, which is exactly the same as Oyumaru. I'm just using the blue pack first. I will use the Oyumaru, obviously, because I think it's brilliant. And this is how I'm going to be casting up the Great Unclean One. And these parts are going to feature on a future build, something big and exciting that I've been planning for a couple of years since I really started my death guard, and hopefully it will come to fruition at some point. I'm definitely going to use the mini mould though, or the white morph rather. I'm definitely going to use that white morph, but only for small push moulds. I'm not going to use it on anything intricate and detailed, because I know if I was to use that over this stomach area here, I don't even think I'd be able to get it off the model. I think it would be a bit awkward. So I suppose really we've just had a bit of a discussion around 2 different moulding materials, both of which you could cast and copy up models and be absolutely fine. And obviously the morality of casting up models, that's up to you. I don't cast full models. I cast up parts that I will then use on other genuine models to then, make them interesting. But that's 2 kind of pieces of equipment that you could put in your arsenal just to have some fun with this, and they make some really nice parts. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, check out the videos down below. Like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of YouTube jazz. And thank you for listening to The Waffle.